The scent of vanilla and nervous sweat always lingered around Penelope, but lately a new scent had joined it. Secrets. She genuinely believed her oversized cardigans and quiet demeanor would keep her hidden in the dark corners of the Castaglean Empire. She thought slipping $800 in cash to a discreet Manhattan clinic would sever the trail of the life growing inside her. But you don't keep secrets from a man who owns the city. Alejandro Castillon didn't just find out his shy, plus-sized secretary was pregnant. He had already interrogated the doctor before she even left the waiting room. The nausea hit Penelope right as the private elevator chimed for the 45th floor of the Castilian Enterprise building. She swallowed hard, clamping a hand over her mouth, her knuckles turning white. The plush charcoal grey carpet of the executive suite seemed to tilt beneath her sensible flats. Penelope. Penny to the few people who actually bothered to look past her timid exterior, squeezed her eyes shut and leaned her heavy, soft frame against the cool mahogany paneling of the hallway. Breathe, she told herself. Just breathe. It's only morning sickness. You can hide this. She had always been good at hiding. At 5'4" and comfortably wearing a size 18, Penny was used to being the invisible workhorse. She hid her soft, thick thighs and plush stomach beneath loose, formless wool trousers and oversized, uncranking, chunky knit sweaters that swallowed her curves. In the high-stakes, razor-thin world of Manhattan corporate royalty, which was nothing but a glittering glass-paneled front for the Castaglean crime syndicate. Women looked like runway models. They were sharp, angular, and ruthless. Penny was soft, round, and chronically apologetic. And yet for the past 4 years, she had been the indispensable right hand to Alejandro Castillon, the boss. Pushing herself off the wall, Penny hurried to her desk just outside his towering double doors. She dropped her faux leather tote bag onto her chair and immediately reached for the roll of peppermint lifesavers she kept stashed in her top drawer. She popped one into her mouth, hoping the sharp mint would quell the churning in her stomach and mask the sour scent of her anxiety. It had been exactly 9 weeks since the night that ruined her carefully constructed invisible life. 9 weeks since the annual charity gala at the Pierre Hotel. Alessandro's rival, a brutal loan shark operating out of the Bronx, had crashed the event. A subtle, terrifying standoff had occurred near the cloakroom. Penny had been caught in the crossfire, shoved against a marble pillar. Terrified out of her mind, Alessandro had intervened. His presence alone a dark, suffocating violence that sent the rival running. Afterward, the adrenaline had completely stripped away Alejandro's icy, professional exterior. He had taken her back to his penthouse on Park Avenue to ensure she was safe. He had poured her a glass of Macallan 25, and then he had looked at her, not through her, as she always assumed he did, but at her. When he had touched her cheek, his thumb brushing over her full jawline, she had melted. That night, the ruthless Mafia boss hadn't wanted a supermodel. He had wanted her. He had praised every soft curve, his rough hands mapping the plushness of her hips and the dip of her waist, treating her body like a religion he had just discovered. But the next morning, the sun had risen, and the terror of reality had set in. She was a nobody, a secretary. He was a man who ordered hits with a flick of his wrist, fearing she would become just another discarded plaything. Or worse, a weak point his enemies could exploit. Penny had fled before he woke up. Since then, she had reverted to her oversized sweaters, avoided his gaze, and kept their interactions strictly to schedules, ledgers, and coffee. Alessandro had let her retreat, though his dark, calculating eyes tracked her every move with a terrifying intensity. Penelope, the deep, growly voice, sent a violent shiver down her spine. Penny jumped, almost knocking over her pencil cup. Alejandro Castillon stood in the doorway of his office. He was a towering figure of broad shoulders and lean muscle, dressed in a bespoke midnight blue suit that probably cost more than her yearly salary. His dark hair was perfectly styled, but it was his eyes, pitch black and endlessly assessing, that made men twice his size tremble. "Good morning, Mr. Castillon," she squeaked, her voice betraying her. She immediately cleared her throat. "I have the finalized shipping manifests for the Brooklyn ports. The special imports from Palmo cleared customs at 3 a.m. Alejandro didn't look at the files she was nervously tapping against her desk. He was looking at her. His gaze slowly dragged over her face, noting the pale sheen of sweat on her forehead, the dark circles under her hazel eyes, and the way her trembling hand instinctively hovered near her stomach. "Are you ill, Penelope?" he asked softly. The tone was dangerous. Alejandro Castillon did not do soft unless he was laying a trap. "No, sir," she lied quickly, forcing a tight smile. "Just didn't sleep well. I'll get your espresso." "I don't want espresso," he murmured, taking a slow step toward her desk. The sheer gravity of his presence seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. He braced his large, ringed hands on the edge of her desk, leaning in. Penny instinctively leaned back, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You've been drinking chamomile tea for 2 weeks. Alejandro noted, his voice a low rumble. "You stopped drinking your usual iced lattes. You flinch when Lorenzo brings the garlic-heavy pasta from the deli downstairs. And you are hiding behind a sweater that could house a small family, despite the fact that it is 72 degrees in this office." Penny's breath hitched. He notices everything. He's a predator. Of course, he notices. "I'm trying a new diet," she blurted out, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. She gestured vaguely to her plump figure. "You know, trying to slim down." A flash of genuine anger darkened Alejandro's eyes so fast she almost missed it. "You don't need a diet," he stated coldly. "You need to tell me the truth." "That is the truth," she whispered, looking down at her hands. "I have a lunch appointment today, actually, just running some errands." Alejandro stared at the crown of her head for a long, suffocating moment. Then he stood up to his full height, adjusting his cuffs. "Take all the time you need for your errands, Penelope. But remember, I don't like being lied to. It makes me paranoid. And you know what happens to people who make me paranoid." With that, he turned and walked back into his office, leaving the door open just an inch. Penny exhaled a shaky breath, her hands trembling so hard she could barely grip her mouse. She had to get out of here. She had to confirm what the plastic stick in her bathroom had told her. And then she had to disappear, At 12:15 p.m., clears throat. Penny slipped out of the towering glass skyscraper, wrapping a thick camel-coiled trench coat tightly around her plush body. The biting October wind off the Hudson River whipped at her brown hair, but she barely felt the cold. Her mind was a chaotic storm of fear and logistics. She didn't take an Uber, knowing that Alejandro had full access to her corporate card and app history. Instead, she walked 3 blocks to the subway, paying for a Metro card with a crisp $20 bill. She took the train to the Upper East Side, getting off at 68th Street. She walked another 4 blocks, making sure to blend in with the busy crowds of tourists and professionals, completely unaware of the sleek black Mercedes SUV that was trailing her from 2 avenues away. Inside the SUV sat Leo Rossi, Alejandro's head of security and most trusted enforcer. Leo was a man made of scars and silence. He kept his eyes on Penny's retreating figure, tapping his earpiece. "Boss," Leo said quietly, the engine of the Mercedes purring beneath him. She took the train to the Upper East Side, just walked into a brownstone on East 72nd. It's a private medical practice. Dr. Harrison Gable, general practice, but he specializes in discreet, high-profile maternity care. There was a long, terrifying silence on the other end of the line. The heavy breathing of Alejandro Castilian was the only sound. "Secure the block." Alejandro's voice finally came through the earpiece, sounding like grinding stones. "Get me the doctor's direct line." Clears throat now. Ignorant of the net closing around her, Penny pushed open the heavy oak door of Dr. Gable's clinic. It didn't look like a hospital. It smelled like lavender and expensive wood polish with plush cream-colored sofas and soft classical music playing. Penny approached the receptionist, pulling a thick envelope of cash from her bag. "Penelope Russo," she whispered. "I have a 100 p.m. appointment. I'm paying out of pocket. No insurance." "Of course, Miss Russo. The doctor will be right with you." The receptionist smiled kindly, taking the envelope. 10 minutes later, Penny was sitting on the edge of an examination table, shivering despite the paper gown draped over her generous curves. Dr. Harrison Gable, a kindly man in his late 50s with silver hair and gentle demeanor, walked in. "Miss Russo," he smiled, reviewing a fresh clipboard. "You mentioned over the phone that you've had 3 positive at-home tests and are experiencing severe morning sickness and fatigue." "Yes," Penny said, her voice shaking. She looked down at her thick thighs, feeling a sudden wave of inadequacy. I just need to know for sure, and I need to know how far along I am. It was an accident, a one-time thing." "Well, let's take a look and ease your mind," Dr. Gable said warmly. He helped her lie back, dimming the lights. When the cold gel hit the soft, fleshy mound of her stomach, Penny gasped. She turned her head away, staring at the blank wall, praying this was all a hormonal fluke. But as Dr. Gable moved the wand over her abdomen, a sound filled the quiet room. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Fast, rhythmic, undeniable. Penny burst into tears. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. It wasn't just a missed period. It wasn't stress. There was a living, breathing piece of Alejandro Castilian inside her. A Mafia heir. If Alessandro's enemies found out, they would use her to get to him. They would kidnap her, torture her, and if Alessandro found out, he would never let her go. He would trap her in a gilded cage, a mob wife in everything but name, until he eventually tired of her soft, unimpressive body and replaced her with someone beautiful, keeping the child for himself. 9 weeks, 3 days, Dr. Gable announced softly, looking at the screen. A very strong, healthy heartbeat. You are definitely pregnant, Miss Russo. Please, Penny choked out, grabbing the doctor's sleeve as he wiped the gel from her stomach. Please, Dr. Gable. No one can know about this. No files. Nothing on a server. You have to promise me. Dr. Gable frowned, patting her hand. Patient confidentiality is my strict policy, Penny. You are safe here. But as Dr. Gable stepped out of the examination room to let Penny dress, his private office phone began to ring. It was a direct, unlisted line that only his most elite, dangerous clients possessed. Frowning, he walked into his office and picked it up. Dr. Gable. Doctor. A dark, velvet, smooth voice purred through the receiver. The doctor's blood ran cold. He knew that voice. Everyone in New York's shadow economy knew that voice. Mr. Castilian, Dr. Gable stammered, pulling the blinds of his office window down instinctively. To what do I owe the pleasure? I didn't think any of your associates were due for checkups. They aren't, Alejandro said. The calmness in his voice was far more terrifying than rage. But a woman just walked into your clinic, brown hair, wearing a trench coat, frightened. Her name is Penelope Russo. Doctor, Gable swallowed hard, glancing at the closed door of the examination room. Mr. Castiglione, you know I cannot confirm or deny, save the ethics lecture for the medical board. Harrison, Alessandro interrupted, his tone shifting from velvet to steel. That woman works for me. More importantly, she belongs to me. I know why she's there. I just want you to confirm what I already suspect. If you lie to me, I will have Leo Rossi burn your beautiful little Upper East Side clinic to the ground, with you inside it. A drop of sweat rolled down Dr. Gable's temple. He had built his life on discretion. But Castigle was the devil incarnate. You don't say no to the devil. She is 9 weeks pregnant, Mr. Castiglione, Dr. Gable whispered, his moral compass snapping under the weight of sheer survival. The fetus is healthy. A heavy exhale echoed through the phone. It sounded almost like relief. Print her ultrasound. Give her a copy. Give her whatever vitamins she needs, Alejandro ordered, his voice suddenly thick with an unrecognizable emotion. Do not tell her we spoke. Do not let her know I am aware. I will handle her myself. And Harrison. Yes, if she ever misses an appointment, or if you ever make her feel uncomfortable about her size, I will pull your tongue out through your throat. Am I understood? Crystal clear, sir. The line went dead when Penny emerged from the examination room 10 minutes later, clutching a small paper bag of prenatal vitamins and a tiny black and white sonogram photo hidden in the depths of her purse. Dr. Gable gave her a strained smile. Take care of yourself, Miss Russo. I'll see you in 4 weeks. Thank you, Doctor. Penny breathed, feeling a false sense of security wash over her. She had done it. She was safe. She just needed a few weeks to quietly pack up her apartment, drain her savings, and buy a bus ticket to somewhere small in the Midwest, Omaha, maybe, or a quiet town in Iowa. She would raise this baby in peace, far away from the blood and bullets of New York. She walked out of the clinic, hailed a yellow cab, and headed back to the Castaglean building, utterly blind to the black SUV that escorted her taxi all the way down Lexington Avenue. The bullpen of the 45th floor was eerily quiet when Penny stepped out of the elevator at 2:15 p.m. Usually, clear as throat, the phones were ringing off the hook. Analysts were shouting across desks, and Alessandro's underbosses were pacing the halls, smoking cigars despite the building's strict regulations. But today, it was dead silent. The trading desks were empty. The reception area was deserted. Penny's heart immediately leapt into her throat. Her thick thighs rubbed together anxiously beneath her wool trousers as she slowly walked toward her desk. Sitting on top of her keyboard was a single white porcelain teacup. Steam was rising from it, carrying the sharp, spicy scent of fresh ginger. Penny stared at the tea. She hadn't asked anyone to make it. In fact, she was the one who made the tea around here. "Come in, Penelope." The voice boomed from the open double doors of Alejandro's office. It wasn't a request. It was an executioner's summons. Clutching her purse to her chest like a shield, Penny grabbed the teacup and slowly walked into the lion's den. Alejandro was sitting behind his massive, custom-built obsidian desk. The afternoon sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, casting his sharp, aristocratic features in shadow. He had taken his suit jacket off, his white dress shirt rolled up at the forearms, revealing the dark ink of the Sicilian Mafia tattoos winding up his skin. "Close the door behind you," he commanded softly. Penny kicked the heavy oak door shut with her heel. It clicked into place with a sound of utter finality. "How was your lunch appointment?" Alessandro asked, leaning back in his leather executive chair. He steepled his fingers, his dark eyes tracking her every tremble. "It was fine," she choked out, standing awkwardly in the center of the vast room. She felt so massive, so clumsy in this sleek architectural space. She tugged at the hem of her oversized sweater, trying to hide the soft curve of her belly. Just had to run to the bank. "The bank?" Alejandro repeated, tasting the lie. He nodded slowly. "Did you make a large withdrawal? Are you planning a trip, Penelope?" No, sir. Just routine stuff." Alejandro stood up, the languid grace of a predator stalking its wounded prey. He walked around the desk, closing the distance between them. Penny's breath quickened. The scent of him, sandalwood, expensive tobacco, and pure concentrated power overwhelmed her senses. He stopped mere inches from her. She had to tilt her head back to look at him. His eyes were devoid of their usual coldness. Instead, they burned with a possessive territorial fire that made her knees weak. "Drink your tea," he ordered softly, glancing at the cup trembling in her hands. "I'm not really thirsty." "Drink it, Penny," he said, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into a commanding velvet purr. "Ginger is good for nausea, specifically morning sickness." The teacup slipped from Penny's numb fingers. It shattered against the hardwood floor, hot ginger tea splashing onto Alejandro's polished Oxfords. But he didn't even flinch. Penny stumbled backward, a gasp ripping from her throat. Her hands flew to her mouth, tears instantly welling in her eyes. How? Alejandro chuckled. but there was no humor in it. It was a dark, dangerous sound. He reached into his trouser pocket and pulled out his phone. With a swipe of his thumb, he turned the screen toward her. It was a live feed of the CCTV camera from outside Dr. Harrison Gable's clinic on East 72nd Street. "You are a brilliant secretary, Penelope," Alejandro murmured, stepping forward to trap her against the edge of the leather sofa. "Your logistical skills are unmatched. You balance my books. You organize my shipments. You keep the feds off my back with your flawless paperwork. But you are a terrible liar. And you are a fool if you thought you could walk around this city carrying my blood without me knowing." "Please," Penny sobbed, the dam finally breaking. She shrank into herself, her plump shoulders shaking, trying to make her large body as small as possible. "Please, Alejandro. I didn't want to trap you. I know I'm not like the women you date. I'm just your secretary. I was going to leave. I was going to quit and go away. I swear I wouldn't bother you." Alejandro's hands shot out. He grabbed her thick, soft waist, pulling her flush against his hard, muscular frame. Penny gasped at the forceful contact. He didn't handle her with disgust. His large hands gripped her plush hips with a possessive, desperate strength, his thumbs pressing into the softness of her stomach through the thick wool of her sweater. "Never," he snarled, his face inches from hers, his breath hot against her tear-stained cheek. "Never say that again. You think I care about those plastic-starving socialites? You think I want a woman who breaks when the wind blows? I tasted you, Penny. I felt how soft, how perfect you are. I watched you run from my bed 2 months ago, and I gave you space because I knew you were terrified of me. I thought you just needed time. But leaving my city, taking my child..." His grip tightened, his dark eyes blazing with a feral, terrifying devotion. "I bought Dr. Gable's entire building while you were in the waiting room," Alejandro confessed, his voice a lethal whisper. "I own him now. I own the block you walked on. I own the trains you rode. You are carrying the heir to the Castellian family. You aren't going to the Midwest, Penelope. You aren't going anywhere ever again." Penny stared up at him, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was terrified of the monster he was to the world. But the way he was looking at her, like she was the most precious, vital thing he had ever possessed, ignited a confusing, dangerous warmth deep in her chest. "What are you going to do to me?" she whispered, a tear slipping down her chubby cheek. Alejandro reached up, his rough, calloused thumb gently wiping the tear away. His expression softened, the ruthless Mafia dawn melting away to reveal a fiercely protective man. "I'm going to marry you," he stated, as if it was already written in stone. "I'm going to take you home. I'm going to strip you out of these ugly, oversized clothes you hide in. And then I'm going to spend the next 7 months worshipping the body that is growing my child." He leaned down, pressing his lips to the shell of her ear, his voice a dark vow. "Try to run from me again. Clears throat mia dolcezza. And I will burn the whole world down just to find you." Alessandro did not let her go back to her desk. He didn't even let her pick up her purse from the floor where it had fallen. Instead, he wrapped his heavy wool overcoat around her trembling, plush shoulders, shielding her from the prying eyes of the few executives lingering in the outer hallways, and escorted her directly to his private elevator. "My things," Penny stammered, her heart fluttering like a trapped bird in her chest as the elevator plummeted toward the underground garage. "Alejandro, my apartment. I have a life. I have bills. I have handled," Alejandro said simply. He stood beside her, radiating a heat that seemed to seep straight through his coat and into her bones. "Leo is at your apartment in Atoria right now. He's packing whatever sentimental items you want to keep. The rest is being disposed of. The lease is already broken." Penny's mouth fell open. "You can't just erase my life in 10 minutes. I am the head of the Castiglione family, Penelope. I can erase a city block in 10 minutes, he replied, his voice dangerously calm. He turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Your life as a struggling, invisible secretary is over. Your life as my wife and the mother of my heir begins right now. You will never want for anything. You will never pay a bill, and you will never hide in the shadows again." When the elevator doors chimed open in the private underground garage, Leo Rossi was already waiting beside a bulletproof Bentley Mulsanne. He didn't say a word, just opened the rear door with a respectful nod. Penny slid into the buttery leather interior, feeling entirely out of her depth, her thick thighs pressed against each other, her hands nervously folding over the small curve of her stomach. Alejandro slid in beside her, his massive frame taking up the majority of the space, his knee intentionally brushing against hers. They didn't drive to his Park Avenue penthouse, the one she had fled from 9 weeks ago. Instead, the Bentley glided toward the ultra-exclusive, fortress-like high-rises of Tribeca. They pulled into a subterranean garage at 56 Leonard Street. The Park Avenue residence was too accessible, Alejandro explained, sensing her confusion. "This building is impenetrable. Private security, dedicated elevator, reinforced glass. No one comes up unless I personally authorize it." Penny felt the cold dread of reality sinking in a gilded cage. "He built me a gilded cage while I was at the doctor's office." When they stepped into the penthouse, Penny's breath caught in her throat. It was sprawling, a masterpiece of modern architecture, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline. But what caught her attention wasn't the priceless artwork or the sweeping views. It was the absolute undeniable proof of Alessandro's obsession. Scattered across the massive kitchen island were brochures from elite private preschools, catalogues for custom nurseries, and a direct line phone with a label reading Dr. Gable Emergency. "Come here," Alessandra murmured, taking her hand and leading her down a long, dimly lit hallway toward the master suite. He pushed open the doors to a massive walk-in closet. Penny gasped. The space, which was larger than her entire Queen's apartment, was filled with clothes, but they weren't the sharp, angular designer pieces meant for sample-sized models. Rows upon rows of custom silk dresses, cashmere loungewear, and tailored coats hung from velvet hangers. There were labels from Bergdorf Goodman, custom maternity wear from European designers, and a massive section of lapel lingerie. And every single piece was perfectly tailored to a size 18. You bought these?" she whispered, running a trembling hand over a deep emerald silk robe. "I had my personal shoppers raid every boutique in the city the moment my surveillance flagged your browser history, looking up prenatal vitamins last week," Alejandro confessed smoothly, wrapping his strong arms around her thick waist from behind. He pulled her flush against his chest, burying his face in her neck. I told them to throw out anything that wasn't designed to worship a woman with real curves. Penny squeezed her eyes shut. I'm fat, Alessandro. I'm soft, and I'm clumsy, and I'm not Mafia wife material. You could have any supermodel in New York. Why me? Why are you doing this? Alejandro spun her around so violently it made her gasp. His hands gripped her wide hips, his thumbs pressing into the plushness of her thighs. Do not ever insult my woman again, he growled, his eyes blazing with a feral intensity. I am surrounded by sharp, starving, ruthless people all day. I deal in blood and concrete. You think I want to come home to a woman made of sharp angles and ambition? He pushed her backward until the back of her knees hit a velvet ottoman in the center of the closet, forcing her to sit. He dropped to his knees in front of her. A man who bowed to no one, kneeling at her feet. I want soft, Alessandro declared, his rough hands tracing the heavy curve of her calves, pushing her oversized trousers up to bare her skin. I want lush. I want a woman who looks like a Renaissance painting. I watched you for 4 years, Penelope. I watched you hide this incredible, abundant body under ugly sweaters. You are the only soft thing in my dark, violent world. And you are mine. He pressed a fierce, open-mouthed kiss to her plush stomach, right over the thick wool of her sweater. Penny shattered. A sob tore through her throat, and she ran her fingers into his dark-styled hair. For her entire life, her size had been a source of shame, a reason to be overlooked. To Alejandro Castellion, it was a religion. I'm scared, she whimpered. I know, Alejandro whispered, pressing his forehead against her stomach, listening to the flutter of the life inside her. But you will never be scared of me, and I pity the man who ever tries to make you scared of anything else. 3 weeks later, the secret was out. The underground marriage of Alejandro Castellion to his painfully shy, overweight secretary had sent shockwaves through the New York syndicates. To the public, it was a whirlwind corporate romance filed quietly at City Hall. But to the 5 families, it was a massive vulnerability. A Mafia Dawn did not marry for love. He married for alliances, for bloodlines, for territory. Marrying a civilian, nobody was an insult to the delicate balance of power. Alejandro knew he had to squash the whispers before they turned into a roar. He had to present Penny to his capos and his allies, not as a weakness, but as the untouchable queen of his empire. The private dinner was held in the back room of a legendary, heavily guarded Italian restaurant in East Harlem, a place closed to the public and notoriously operated by the syndicate. The room smelled of rich marinara, roasted garlic, and the expensive cigar smoke of 20 dangerous men. Penny stood outside the heavy mahogany doors, clutching Alessandro's arm. Her heart was beating so fast, she thought she might faint. She was no longer hiding behind oversized cardigans. Tonight, Alessandro had dressed her for war. She wore a custom-made, deep burgundy wrap dress that hugged every thick curve of her body, the silk plunging at her heavy breasts and cinching tightly at her waist just above the tiny, barely there bump of her 12-week pregnancy. A diamond necklace worth more than a small island rested against her collarbone. Her brown hair was blown out in voluminous waves. She looked expensive. She looked powerful, but inside she was terrified. "Breathe, Mia Regina," Alessandro murmured, brushing his knuckles against her flushed cheek. "They are wolves, but I am the monster that keeps the wolves in line. Keep your head high. Let them look. But remember, they answer to me." He pushed the doors open. The raucous laughter in the room died instantly. 20 pairs of cold, calculating eyes snapped to the entrance. The men in the room were murderers, extortionists, and thieves wearing bespoke suits. They stared at Alessandra, and then their eyes drifted to Penny. Penny felt the weight of their judgment. She saw the subtle snee, the raised eyebrows. She wasn't an Italian ace. She wasn't a slender, icy mob daughter. She was plump, flushed, and clearly terrified. Alessandro led her to the head of the long banquet table. He pulled out her chair, waiting until she was seated, before taking his own place beside her. "Gentlemen," Alessandro said, his voice easily cutting through the heavy silence. "My wife, Penelope Castiglione." A murmur of insincere congratulations rippled through the room. Glasses of Barolo wine were raised, but the tension was thick enough to slice with a meat cleaver. Sitting halfway down the table was Vincent Moretti, an older, vicious capo who controlled the Brooklyn docks. Vincent had been gunning for his own daughter to marry Alessandro to secure an alliance. The sight of Penny, a soft, unremarkable secretary, clearly boiled his blood. Vincent leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine. "Congratulations, boss. Truly, though, I must admit, it's a surprise. We all thought you'd choose someone with a bit more pedigree." No offense to the new Mrs. Castiglione, but she doesn't exactly look like she's built to survive our world. Seems like she's built for comfort rather than speed. The table went dead silent. A few men subtly shifted their chairs backward, anticipating the blast radius. Penny's face burned hot with humiliation. She looked down at her plate, her fingers curling tightly into her napkin. It was exactly what she had feared. She was an embarrassment to him in this world. Alessandro didn't yell. He didn't slam his fists on the table. He calmly picked up his silver steak knife, admired the edge of the blade in the dim lighting, and then stood up. The languid grace of his movement was terrifying. He walked slowly around the table, his footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor, until he was standing directly behind Vincent Moretti. Vincent gulped, a bead of sweat tracing down his wrinkled temple, though he tried to maintain his smug composure. "Vincent," Alessandro whispered, his voice dangerously soft. "You have known me since I was a boy. You know how I operate. You know that I do not leave things to chance, and I do not make mistakes." "Just an observation, boss," Vincent stammered. "An observation," Alessandro repeated, in a blur of motion, too fast to track. Alessandro's hand shot out. He grabbed a handful of Vincent's silver hair, yanking his head back violently, and slammed the steak knife down, burying the blade directly into the heavy oak table, trapping Vincent's silk tie against the wood. Several men jumped to their feet, reaching into their jackets, but Leo Rossi and Alessandro's guards instantly drew their weapons, aiming at the room. "Sit down," Alessandro roared, the sound vibrating with raw, unhinged violence. The men slowly sank back into their chairs, raising their hands in surrender. Alessandro leaned down, his face inches from Vincent's terrified eyes. You look at my wife, and you see comfort. I look at my wife, and I see the only reason I don't burn this entire city to the ground. She is the mother of the Castillionaire. Her body is sacred. Her softness is the only mercy I possess. You disrespect her. You disrespect my bloodline. He twisted the handle of the knife, pinning Vincent closer to the table. If anyone in this room, Alejandro announced, his pitch-black eyes scanning the terrified faces of his carpals, ever looks at my wife with anything less than absolute reverence, if anyone ever makes a comment about her size, her background, or her capability, I will not just kill you. I will dismantle your families. I will erase your names from this earth. Is that understood? Understood, boss? A chorus of shaky voices replied immediately. Vincent, Alejandro whispered, pulling the knife free and violently shoving the man's head forward. Did you hear me? Yes, boss. My apologies to the Queen. Vincent choked out, rubbing his throat. Alejandro tossed the knife onto the table. He straightened his cuffs, his chest heaving, before turning his gaze back to Penny at the head of the table. Penny was trembling, but as she looked at Alessandro, this terrifying, beautiful monster who had just subjugated the most dangerous men in New York, just to protect her honor, something inside her shifted. The shy, invisible secretary died in that chair. In her place, a new woman took a breath, a woman who realized she wielded the ultimate power over the city's most ruthless king. Alejandro walked back to her side, his eyes searching hers for fear or disgust. But Penny didn't look away. Instead, she reached out her soft, plump hand and rested it over his large, scarred knuckles on the table. "Thank you, husband," she said, her voice clear and steady, ringing out through the silent room. A dark, triumphant smirk played on Alejandro's lips. He brought her hand to his mouth, kissing her knuckles while maintaining eye contact with the room. "Eat, gentlemen," Alejandro commanded, taking his seat. "We have an empire to run." The sweltering July heat of New York City baked the asphalt outside Mount Sinai Hospital. But inside the ultra-exclusive private VIP maternity wing on the 11th floor, the air was crisp, cool, and smelled faintly of expensive orchids. At 34 weeks pregnant, Penny was a vision of maternal abundance. Her belly was massive, stretching the fabric of her blush-pink cashmere maternity dress. Her thick thighs aching under the new weight. Her breasts heavy and full. To the world, she was a target. To Alejandro, she was a living deity. He had kept his promise, worshipping the ground she walked on, transforming her innate shame into a quiet, unshakable confidence. But a king is only as safe as his weakest border, and Vincent Moretti had spent the last 6 months nursing his bruised ego and plotting in the shadows of Brooklyn. "Blood pressure is absolutely perfect, Mrs. Castilian." Dr. Harrison Gable smiled, adjusting the cuff on Penny's plump arm. Alejandro had essentially bought out Dr. Gable's contract, moving his entire practice into the secure wing at Mount Si, to ensure Penny had the best medical infrastructure in the world at her disposal. "He's kicking a lot today," Penny said softly, resting her manicured hand over her giant stomach. Standing in the corner of the room, arms crossed over his broad chest, Alejandro's hard face softened into a look of absolute adoration. "He knows he's going to rule this city," Alessandro murmured, stepping forward to press a kiss to the crown of her head. "I have to step out to take a call from the Palermo outfit. Mia Dolcezza Leo is right outside the door. I will be back in 2 minutes." "Don't be long," she smiled, leaning into his touch. Alejandro slipped out of the room, leaving the heavy oak door slightly ajar. Dr. Gable turned back to his monitor to print the ultrasound images, humming a quiet tune. Penny reached for her glass of ice water. Then the world exploded. It didn't happen with a dramatic monologue. It happened with the terrifying, deafening crack of suppressed gunfire. The heavy wooden door to the examination room splintered inward. Leo Rossi's massive body was violently shoved into the room, a dark crimson stain blooming across his shoulder as he crashed into the medical cart. Penny screamed, instinctively, curling her large body inward, wrapping her thick arms tightly around her stomach to shield her baby. 4 men breached the room. They weren't Italian Mafia. They were wearing tactical gear, their faces hidden behind black balaclavas. Vincent Moretti hadn't used his own men. He had hired a ghost squad of Chechen mercenaries to do his dirty work, ensuring it couldn't be traced back to his territory. One of the mercenaries barked in broken English, advancing toward Penny. "The boss wants her alive to bargain. Shoot the doctor." Dr. Gable didn't even have time to raise his hands before 2 suppressed rounds hit him in the chest, dropping the kindly man to the cold linoleum floor. Penny's blood ran cold. The timid, invisible secretary she used to be would have frozen. She would have fainted. But Alessandro Castile Leone had spent the last 6 months teaching her that she was a queen, and a queen protects her heir. As the first mercenary lunged to grab her heavy arms, Penny didn't cower. She reached blindly onto the overturned medical cart, her fingers wrapping around a heavy, stainless steel surgical scalpel. With a guttural cry of pure maternal rage, she slashed the blade frantically across the mercenary's exposed throat. The man gurgled, stumbling backward, his hands flying to his neck as dark blood sprayed across Penny's blush-pink dress. The other 3 men froze in absolute shock. They had been told they were kidnapping a soft, fat, weak secretary. They hadn't expected a lioness. That 1-second delay was all it took. A shadow moved in the doorway, so fast and so violent it barely looked human. Alejandro Castellian entered the room, not as a businessman, but as the apex predator of the New York underworld. He didn't use a gun. He used his bare hands. Alejandro grabbed the closest mercenary by the tactical vest, lifted the 200B man off his feet, and drove his skull directly into the reinforced concrete pillar of the hospital wall. The sickening crunch of bone echoed through the room. The remaining 2 men spun around, raising their rifles, but Leo Rossi, bleeding out on the floor, raised his sidearm and shot one of them perfectly in the kneecap. As the man went down screaming, Alessandro closed the distance to the final mercenary. He stripped the rifle from the man's hands with terrifying ease, snapped the man's wrist, and drove a vicious, fatal strike into his sternum. In less than 30 seconds, the pristine VIP suite was a slaughterhouse. Alejandro didn't even look at the bodies. He dropped the stolen rifle and rushed to Penny. She was backed into the corner, hyperventilating, her plush body smeared with the mercenary's blood, the scalpel still trembling in her white-knuckled grip. "Penny? Penny, look at me," Alejandro ordered, his voice raw with a panic no one had ever heard before. He fell to his knees in front of her, his large hands frantically patting down her thick thighs, her massive stomach, her chest, checking for bullet holes. "Are you hit? Do you, Penelope? Are you bleeding?" "It's not my blood," she sobbed, dropping the scalpel. She collapsed forward into his chest. "Alejandro, they shot Dr. Gable. They tried to take him. They tried to take the baby." Alejandro crushed her against his chest, burying his face in her neck. He was shaking. The ruthless Mafia boss was trembling like a leaf. He held her generous, soft body, as if she were the only thing tethering him to the earth. "I have you," he growled, the sound vibrating against her skin, laced with a demonic promise. "I have you, and I am going to paint the streets of Brooklyn red for this." Suddenly, Penny gasped, her back arching violently. Her hands dug into Alejandro's tailored shoulders like talons. "Alessandro," she choked out. A sudden hot gush of fluid soaking through her dress and onto the floor. "My water, Alejandro. It's too early. The baby is coming now." The next 12 hours were a blur of absolute chaotic terror. While a backup trauma team flooded the suite to save Dr. Gable and Leo Rossi, a specialized neonatal team wheeled Penny into an emergency delivery room. The hospital was completely locked down. Over 200 of the Castellian Syndicate's most lethal soldiers surrounded Mount C, barricading Fifth Avenue and turning the hospital into an impenetrable fortress inside the delivery room. Alejandro stripped off his blood-soaked suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves. He never left Penny's side. He didn't care about the blood, the sweat, or the screaming. He held her heavy, plush leg, murmuring frantic Italian prayers and vows of devotion against her damp forehead as she pushed through the agonizing, premature labor. Across the city, Alessandro's wrath was being executed. He had made one phone call from the delivery room. 30 minutes later, Vincent Moretti was found dead in his private club in Williamsburg. An infamous Castellian signature left on his desk. The message was sent to all 5 families. "Touch the Queen, and you lose your head." "One more push, Mrs. Castellian," the lead obstetrician shouted over the beeping monitors. "The shoulders are crowning. I can't." Penny sobbed, her face red and swollen, her thick body utterly exhausted. "Alejandro, I'm so tired." "Look at me," Alessandro commanded fiercely, gripping her cheeks with his large hands, forcing her to meet his dark, burning eyes. "You are the strongest thing I have ever known. You fought off a killer to protect our son. You are a Castilian, Penelope. Push for me. Give me our son." With a primal, earth-shattering scream, Penny bore down one final time. The room fell deadly silent for 2 agonizing seconds, followed immediately by the piercing, beautiful wail of a newborn baby. Penny collapsed back against the pillows, sobbing uncontrollably. "He's beautiful," the doctor announced, quickly cleaning the infant. "A little early, but his lungs sound incredible. A very strong baby boy." The nurse wrapped the tiny, squalling infant in a soft blanket and walked over, handing him not to Penny, but to Alessandro, the ruthless, terrifying mob boss, a man who had ended a bloodline an hour prior without blinking. stared down at the tiny, fragile bundle in his massive, tattooed arms. Tears, real hot tears, spilled over his dark lashes and ran down his sharp cheekbones. He fell to his knees beside Penny's hospital bed, resting the baby against her soft, heaving chest. "Look what you made me do." Alessandro wept, pressing his lips to Penny's damp hair, his voice breaking completely. "Look at our perfect boy." Penny looked down at the tiny face, a perfect blend of her softness and Alessandro's sharp features. She wrapped her plump arms around her son, holding him against her heavy breasts. She was exhausted. She was battered. And her life would never again be normal. She would always have guards. She would always live in a gilded, bulletproof cage. But as she looked up at the terrifying man on his knees, crying as he kissed her fingers, she realized she wasn't a prisoner. She was the center of his universe. She was the absolute ruler of the man who ruled the city. "What do we name him?" Penny whispered, exhausted but radiant. Alessandro looked at the mother of his child, the fat, beautiful, incredibly brave woman who had completely dismantled his cold heart. "Leo," Alessandro decided softly, honoring the man who had taken a bullet for her. "Leo Castiglione, the future king of New York." Penny smiled, pulling Alessandro down by the collar of his ruined shirt to capture his lips in a fierce, breathless kiss. "Long live the king," she whispered against his mouth. Alejandro kissed her back, his large hand gently resting on her soft, abundant waist. "And long live the queen." Penny's clear's throat journey from an invisible, insecure secretary hiding her plush figure in oversized sweaters to a fearless Mafia queen who would bleed to protect her family proves that true power doesn't come from fitting into a mold. It comes from embracing exactly who you are. Alessandro didn't just love her, despite her size. He worshipped her for it, building an empire where her softness became his ultimate strength, and their child became a symbol of unyielding devotion. Did you love Penny and Alessandro's intense, high-stakes romance? What was your favorite plot twist in this Mafia drama? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your fellow romance lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling original audio stories. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a new